I was lucky enough to play South of Midnight early. The bits of South of Midnight that are unique and doing something new, I absolutely love. And the bits that I don't love as much, I'm hoping that there's plenty of room for improvement as you progress through the game. I'm Matt Phillips. I'm joined by MC Fixer and Paul Despawn. We host a weekly Xbox podcast that you can subscribe and listen to. And South by Midnight is obviously a highly anticipated game for the Xbox community and Xbox as a brand. These two are going to ask me plenty of questions about my thoughts on the preview, and we're going to get into it. Let's do it.
You mean to tell me your mama never told you stories about critters and weavers?
This game is obviously super important to the Xbox library. The story is probably the most important thing that I need to know about this game. Talk to me about that. Like, how long did you get to play with it? And talk to me a little bit about the story, please.
Yeah, so we got to play through Chapter 3. You play as this main character, Hazel. She's like this 19-year-old kind of ordinary girl, lives in the South, and her house gets swept away in a storm with her mother inside, and then that kind of sets you on this journey. Chapter 3 kind of kicks off. She's already got these like magical abilities, so we didn't see her getting any of that stuff, but she's very much coming to terms with what that is and what it looks like and like how it works, right? And so like one of the first things you learn is a double jump, and of course that's her using her magical abilities to be able to do that. But you're sort of seeing the ghosts of these weavers, which are the people who get these magical abilities from the landscape, doing these actions that then teaches you how to do them. It's really interesting. So I also interviewed the developers, right, after I did the preview. And we talked a lot about being a weaver and what being a weaver in this world means. And yeah, you are chosen by the environment to try and heal the trauma of this event, right? And so like this storm sweeps through, all hell has broken loose in a very magical sense, and you are there to fix it. And so being a weaver isn't something that's like in your blood or whatever. It's just the environment choosing you at that time. It all stems from this idea that in Southern culture, weaving textiles was this like very feminine thing that brought a lot of power to women in that sort of day and age, right? In history. And so that's where this like magical ability to like heal and perform all these crazy magical feats comes from.
Whoa! Pardon my mud. What'd you see? Tell me all the juicy detail.
I think the story is fascinating here, right? Like the world is fascinating. We keep saying this is not something we've ever seen in video games before, and that so comes through. I would say, especially in the voice acting. There's a character called the Catfish who's like kind of like the narrator, but also your main companion. And you meet him early on in Chapter 3 in the preview. And he just sounds authentic to that area, but I've never heard a voice like his in a game before in my life. And so you're instantly getting this feel for this mythology and this place and this time that, yeah, like I've never experienced in a game before. And that's the thing that I'm most excited to keep pursuing and find out more about and dive in on.
Was your mama a weaver too?
Social worker.
Do you feel like that is the main focus of this, like the authenticity of that story that they're trying to tell?
I interviewed one of the writers on like the lead narrative on the game, and so all the stuff that I went deeper on, right, outside of the preview was that, right? And so like they're obviously going to talk about how important that is. That's their job, and so like that's, you know, the sort of the behind the scenes look that I got at the game, right? But it also does feel like, and we'll get onto gameplay in a little bit, but the story feels like it's doing something very new, and the gameplay feels like it's very much not doing anything new.
All right, gameplay-wise, what is the moment-to-moment gameplay like?
I think there's like two aspects to it, right? There's like exploration and combat, and they're kind of your main two moment-to-moment gameplay things. Exploration, I only got like a very loose taste of. You kind of get into this zone, it's quite linear as you're like learning to double jump and learning all these things. And then you get to a much more open area that, well, I say open, it's quite tight, but it's quite maze-like, and so you find yourself getting lost and going back and finding, oh, a weird little collectible over here, or, you know, health pickup over here, or whatever it is. And you get like experience points to unlock stuff in the skill tree, and they're often hidden off on a side area. So that's what the like exploration feels like. You get a glide quite early on as well that allows you to get to sort of different areas and different zones, and I'm sure you'll be unlocking more stuff. The only kind of, I would say, downside that I had to that, which is a very specific one, but I think kind of shows the gameplay philosophy throughout, really, is that you have an ability where you throw magic at a thing and create a platform to stand on, right? So you might not be able to make this jump, but you can throw your magic at the broken bridge on the other side, and now it's a fixed bridge and you can land on it. But you can't do that whilst you're jumping. And so like often in a game like where platforming is like a thing, you would expect to like have to jump and do it in midair so that you can, make it or like do it twice or whatever it is. But often I would get ahead of myself, jump for it and try and throw the magic and just wouldn't be able to do it. And so like it just felt quite slow and stunted in that sense. And that was kind of one of the major pulls for me. And then combat is kind of similar in that you go into these areas that you then get like locked into that are like small arenas where you will fight 4 or 5 haints, they're called. They're like, basically undead zombie things. I don't know. And they've all got slightly different abilities. There's the fat one that spits stuff at you, and there's the quick, skinny ones that come after you really fast. And again, like when you kill an enemy, they kind of fall into this thing and you have to unravel them, which is going up and hitting Y. And it freezes everything, and you have a little cutscene while she does that. And it's just like why are you making me stop? Like, I want this to be like fluid. It almost reminded me of Prince of Persia Sands of Time, where you have to kill the thing with the sand dagger. But they make that a part of the combat, right? That's all about doing combos so that you finish with that thing, and that's how you kill the thing, instead of stopping, cutscene, where you stab the thing, and then get back into the combat. It just felt really stunted to me in a lot of those areas. Apart from that, I think the combat is fine. Like, you've got spells that allow you to pull enemies towards you or push enemies away from you. You basically like debuff enemies and they become weaker to your normal attacks for a certain amount of time. But again, none of that feels particularly new or exciting, right? It's stuff we've seen a million things other times before. There is a skill tree where you're unlocking new abilities and stuff, and so as you get deeper into the game, maybe that opens up, you get more combos, stuff starts to feel more fluid. But they also talked about a little guy who's been in a lot of the trailers and the stop motion stuff they released, a guy called Crouton, who is your childhood doll. The developers said sometimes you ask for a Barbie for Christmas, and instead you get Crouton, which is this like little mashed up thing that I think Hazel's nan has made her, and it's got like a weird button eye, and the other button eye is smaller or whatever. And he's like this little doll who you can use eventually in combat. I didn't get to experience any of this, but this is what they told me. And he, I guess, acts like an Atreus would in like God of War 2018, where he can sort of attack enemies for you, he can possess enemies for you, they told me. And he will also be used in exploration to get to places where Hazel can't. And he's like Ant-Man, like he grows and shrinks. Oh. And so all of that sounded really interesting. Maybe you don't want to overwhelm people in like a preview by giving them all these new interesting mechanics, but I want some new interesting mechanics to check out, and that I would have liked to have checked out, right?
You mentioned skill trees and like the upgrade system. How does that work? What does it look like? How complex is it?
Yeah, so the skill tree system, a lot of it was like blacked out for the preview. So the truth is, I don't know how deep it goes. You find things in the environment that give you certain amounts of experience points, and then when you've got enough experience points, you unlock that skill in the skill tree. It looked pretty basic from what I could see, but yeah, like I got like a jump, ground pound, attack through the skill tree. So I had the push spell, I had the pull spell, and this other debuff spell that I mentioned earlier. And so a lot of the upgrades that were available to me, at least, were upgrades to those spells, but I could see blocks that went deeper, but they just weren't available to me, and I wasn't even able to like hover over and see what they would have been.
You mentioned obviously there were areas where they were locked off due to abilities, there were unlockable like collectibles and things like that you can find. It very much feels like you're describing a Metroidvania. Does it feel like that as you're playing it?
No, I don't think so. I didn't get the sense that you would be like really backtracking, like certainly into like previous chapters and stuff like that. I don't think that's what this is going to be at all. There's a little bit of that in each level, right, where the level isn't just one corridor you're running around. There is other things to go and explore and do, and you might be able to get into that building, or if you go around the back of that building, you might be able to jump in through a window at the top or something like that, right? And that building is totally side and has nothing to do with the story, and you don't have to do it, but there's, some extra experience in there for you or whatever. It feels much more like that than way more so than like really backtracking like a Metroidvania. I don't think that's what they're going for at all.
You mentioned when you jump into these combat scenarios, it very much is like in a sectioned off like area. Is it all the combat like that, or is there like little bits of combat throughout the levels, or is it very segmented?
All the combat I got to experience was like that. Yeah, there's no like, I guess you would say like random encounters or whatever. I don't know how bosses work, like, so there is no boss in chapter 3. Well, that's kind of not true. I think each chapter, or maybe not each chapter, but each of the major chapters, you are trying to cure one particular creature. And so in this chapter, that was a giant tree, and there was no combat involved in that. It was a platforming section to like climb up the tree to get there. And whilst you're doing that, there is music with lyrics that's telling the story of how this tree became this creature. I don't want to spoil too much. I don't want to get into it too much. But yeah, like that's how a decent amount of the story is communicated. Yes, there's beautiful cutscenes and great voice acting and stuff like that, but then you have these musical sections that will tell you the story of this creature. The idea is that these creatures have suffered massive trauma, and that's what's turned them into creatures, and you're there to heal it. And so these like zones or these like pods of enemies are parts of that trauma that you're healing. So like these enemies are cropping up because there's trauma in this area, and so you're going in and cleansing it. So once you've beat that group of enemies in that locked off area, you'll unravel the like core, I guess, like tumor that's in the middle of it, and then all the flowers start growing around it then, and the color comes back to the landscape.
Do you feel like the trauma is like a big like through line through the story? Is it very much like, is it just the world trauma? Is it like the personal trauma that they're trying to touch on? Like, what did the developers kind of delve into on that one?
Trauma's a huge part of it. I think all of these creatures are going to have an empathetic side, right? It's not just, oh, it's a big scary spider lady. It's like, no, there's a reason that the big scary spider lady is a big scary spider lady, and it's a sad story, and it's your job to go figure it out and heal her. I talked to the devs a lot about the inspirations for these characters and where they came from, the like real myths and laws from which they're derived. Like there's one that they've shown off in trailers that I didn't see in the preview called Arugaru, which is basically a South American version of a werewolf, turned it into kind of like an owl man. But his wings are textiles. So it's like, again, back to that like weaving thing, and like everything's very textured. Everything feels very like woven together, for lack of a better word. And those are the bits that excite me the most. Like that's the stuff I want to learn about and explore more and find out most about.
It sounds like a me game. I can't lie to you. Everything you're saying right now sounds very positive for the way games I like to play.
Sure.
But the one thing you did say was it kind of felt very stop-start. Obviously,
yeah.
We're not talking just the stop motion style of art style, but we're talking about the gameplay itself.
Yeah.
How much of that was it stop-start? And do you think it's a deliberate thing that they're trying to do? Or do you think it may be like a misstep in terms of like it takes you out of the moment every single time?
For me, it felt like that. Yeah, it felt very stop-start, and it felt like it was taking me out of the moment. Like I say, when you kill an enemy, you have to unravel them. As soon as you hit unravel, everything else around you freezes, whether it's a projectile in the air, another enemy who's dashing across the battlefield at you, or whatever it is. And Hazel does this little, literally 1 second of, a little flick and the thing unravels. I just wanted that to be like part of the combo. Like, I don't mind having to hit a separate button for it. Like, but if she then like flipped over the thing that you could use that, to traverse your way across the battlefield or get out of the way of danger or whatever. And it was part of a dodge or something, something like I just wanted like it to just have a bit of mechanical complexity to it that didn't full on stop the encounter, do the little cutscene, back into the encounter. Because yeah, that was, I think my major takeaway from it was that was the thing I least liked about it.
And I was so sorry to hear about your misfortune. You find your mama yet?
How do you know about my mama?
The stop motion, obviously, I think it's the question that
Yeah.
probably every single person watching this wants to know. How was it? Was it off-putting? I believe I saw something about being able to turn it off. Did you turn it
Yeah.
off?
Yes. So
Talk to me.
I tried both, right? So like for a little bit of context for people who are new, I used to be an animator. I am a sucker for a good animation, unique animation style and visual style. And the game opened with like a fully stop motion animated cutscene that kind of establishes a little bit of the world. I love that stuff. I love it. I'm an absolute sucker for it, right? And so then, yes, when you get into the gameplay, Hazel is still in that like stop motion framey stuff. If you've played Spider-Man and played in the Into the Spider-Verse suit, you'll know exactly what it feels like, because it feels exactly like that. And so, Hazel is running at, let's call it 14 frames a second, while everything else is running at 30 or whatever the equivalent is. I played both. I kept flicking it back and forth to like try and get a feel for it. What I would say is like, I think after playing for literally maybe a minute, you kind of forget that Hazel's running at a different frame rate, or, you know, that it has that vibe to it. I know some people maybe will be really put off by it, and if you are, flick it off, you know, and then everything's running at 60. It looks great, you know, like, and it runs great. And so I think it's good that you've got that option. But equally, like, I think if you flick it off, I don't think you're missing out on anything. All the cutscenes are lovingly animated in the way that they exactly wanted it to be. I don't think by turning the setting off in the gameplay, you're losing anything or you're gaining anything, really. Like, I think it's totally personal preference. I think it's great that the setting is there. I didn't mind it either way, but I love the cutscenes and the way that they're telling the story.
What would be your final takeaway coming out of this? How were you feeling at the end of the day?
What I'm really hopeful for South of Midnight, basically. Like, I think the story and the way it's telling the story and the cutscenes and just how beautiful the game is has me really, really excited. I was let down a little bit by the gameplay in the preview, and I'm hoping as you progress through the game, as you unlock new skills, as it all gets a bit more complex, I'm hoping that that also comes with more enjoyment out of the moment-to-moment gameplay. Having said that, if it came out exactly as it is now, I'd still play through the whole thing. We know that this is going to be a relatively short game, and I think the main thing for the game is the story and the acting and telling these like new myths and legends. And I didn't see much Hazel, you know, in those cutscenes. Like, she is this kid who has just become basically a wizard, you know, a weaver. You get way more context and, I guess, enjoyment out of the other characters around her. But I think as her story goes on, like, she sounds like an interesting character, like a, you know, pretty much a regular 19-year-old girl who is kind of freaking out because all this crazy shit's happening. And so, yeah, I liked her, but I want to see more of her and see more of her personality throughout. The gameplay is basic, but good, you know? And so, like, maybe that's fine. But I'm hoping that there's room to progress, room for it to get more complex as we go down deeper into the game. So they were my impressions of the early hands-on time that I got with South of Midnight. Let us know in the comments down below if you're excited for the game. Subscribe on YouTube or on podcast services. We do a weekly Xbox podcast and occasional deep dives into previews of games and reviews and all those fun things. And if you're interested in the story and the monsters that are in the game, head over, self-plug time, to FGS, where we have a developer interview, and they basically break down every monster that's been in every trailer. Yeah, I asked them about the mythology and the lore behind every single monster, and so we talked about all of that, which was very cool. So thanks again to Xbox for letting us into your preview. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.